Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now this is just a short pre-ramble before the actual video to discuss a few things. First off, I want to apologise for just how long it's taken for me to get this video out. I know it's been over a month since the last What If came out, and that I first mentioned doing this video at least a couple of months before that. So yeah, it's definitely been a long time coming with this one. And the reason why is simply because it's completely got out of hand. The video, as you're about to find out, is over an hour long, which makes it the new title holder for the longest What If video I've ever made, and one of the longest videos in general that I've ever done as well. The longer and more in-depth a video is, the longer it takes to make, basically. There were lots of script revisions and last-minute additions, as well as loads of photo edits to make. If I had been purely doing this by myself, I just wouldn't have been able to cope. So I was very fortunate that some friends of mine stepped in to help out. The first 40 minutes of the video weren't even edited by me. They were edited by Billy Bob and Robbie Factor instead. People also helped with the photo edits, with Billy Bob and Robbie Factor doing some, along with Naughty Orchid 12, Red Makes Music and Nanny Nom Noms. This video was so incredibly stressful for me, so I can't thank everyone enough for stepping in and helping me so much with it. You all really took a massive weight off my shoulders, and I'm extremely grateful for that. I should also mention something else which I'm sure some people may be wondering. Isn't this something similar to a video that fellow YouTuber Force Dalek is planning? Well, yes and no. Yes, it's true that we've both decided to do what if videos based around the idea of the Doctor's regeneration in the Stolen Earth / Journey's End, but I decided to make this video long before I'd heard anything about Forces, so there really wasn't anything intentional with it on my part. It is a what if scenario that is pretty popular and fairly often discussed among fans, so I'm not surprised that I'm not the only one who's decided to make it now. But whilst I don't really know what Force is planning with his video, I don't think it's very likely that his video and mine will be the exact same. We're different people thinking up our own ideas for this scenario, therefore we'll naturally have different takes on it, and that's absolutely fine. So please don't think I'm trying to copy anyone with this video. I can assure you that I would never even think about doing such a thing, as I don't see why I would want to. I'm not massively familiar with Force's stuff myself, but I just wanted to address that, in case any of you watching also watch his stuff, and wondered what was going on. One final thing I want to touch on is what will come next for the What Ifs, and the channel as a whole. I will be doing a separate video touching on this in more detail very soon, but suffice to say I've had to make some very difficult choices, and some videos are unfortunately going to have to be pushed back to next year. But this doesn't mean that this will be the last What If for this year or anything like that, as I still have others that I want to try and get through before the end of the year, if I can. I've just had to prioritise some stuff over others, as well as be more realistic with how much spare time I will be able to spend on videos now that I've started university. But as I say, I'll go into more detail in another video, and also I apologise if my voice sounds a bit weird. I am currently in the middle of having a cold, unfortunately. Anyway, with all of that out of the way with, I hope you all enjoy the actual What If itself, and without further ado, here it is. Hello everyone and welcome to another video. The year is 2008. David Tennant is embarking on his third series as the 10th Doctor. He's joined on his Series 4 adventures by a familiar face. Catherine Tate returns as Donna Noble, having made her first appearance just over 15 months prior in the 2006 Christmas special, The Runaway Bride. Series 4 goes on to become arguably one of the most successful and beloved series of the show's entire revival, with the 10th Doctor and Donna being cemented as a fan favourite Doctor and companion pairing. They were proved to be so popular, in fact, that both Tennant and Tate would eventually return to the show 15 years later for the 60th anniversary specials. But before that, things would come to a head for the Doctor and Donna in the climactic two-part Series 4 finale, the Stolen Earth / Journey's End. This two-parter serves as almost a finale to the whole of the first Russell T Davies era, with many past companions from the past 4 series making their return to help the Doctor and Donna defeat the Daleks. From Rose to Martha, and even seeing the show's 2 then currently running spin-offs crossover with the main show and each other. The Torchwood team of Jack, Gwen and Yanto, and Sarah Jane and her son Luke from the Sarah Jane Adventures. Davros even returns for this story, with actor Julian Bleach making his debut as the character. Fans watching at the time can already tell how much of an epic finale this is going to be. But they're completely caught off guard when towards the end of the Stolen Earth episodes, the Doctor is shot by a Dalek, just as he's running towards Rose to be reunited with her. Jack manages to arrive just seconds after the shot and destroys the Dalek. He, Rose and Donna then carry the injured Doctor back to the TARDIS. Once inside, the Doctor regenerates in a shocking cliffhanger, which leaves the entire audience on the edge of their seats for a whole week, and gets the whole UK speculating on what's going to happen next. When the next episode called Journey's End begins, it's revealed that the 10th Doctor manages to avoid changing his face by siphoning off the remaining energy into his spare hands, although the 10th Doctor would go on to fully regenerate into Matt Smith's 11th just over 17 months later on New Year's Day 2010, with the second and final part of The End of Time. But what if things had gone differently? What if, in an alternate timeline, the 10th Doctor's era had ended much sooner than it actually did, and in a very abrupt way? What if David Tennant had left after the Stolen Earth / Journey's End? Now, I have a lot of you to thank for this idea, as this has been another scenario that's been highly requested. Well, I say that, but that isn't strictly true. A lot of you have wanted me to do what if Matt Smith had been in Journey's End, and that is originally what this video was going to be. But as you can see, the title has now changed, and the video has ended up going in a slightly different direction. But we'll still talk about 11 being in Journey's End, don't you worry. So how would this scenario come about? Well, it's fairly straightforward actually. We'll say that 10 is still shot by the Dalek and has to regenerate because of it. But now, instead of him using a bit of regenerative energy to heal himself and then siphoning the rest off into his spare hand, let's say that 10 is too late to do that, and the process unexpectedly ends with a brand new Doctor staring at Jack, Rose and Donna. So there's actually a couple of different ways this scenario could play out from there. One with Matt Smith still playing the 11th Doctor, and one where someone else takes on the part. I'm now going to go through both of these timelines in turn, starting with timeline number 1. Matt Smith is the Doctor. So this first timeline would obviously be the one that still has Matt Smith play 11. We'll say that Stephen Moffat is the one to cast him, as he'd still be taking over as the showrunner from Russell T Davies for Series 5 onwards. But perhaps Russell decides to have Smith start his tenure early, as he would decide against the idea of having Tennant stay on for the Series 4 specials. Perhaps he does this so that Smith can establish himself in the part a bit sooner, so that the transition from going from an extremely popular Doctor such as David Tennant will be a bit easier and fairer for the young 25-year-old actor. Russell would also use Tennant moving on to Hamlet as another reason, and that the Series 4 finale might be a great last hurrah for his era, as it kind of felt a bit like it in our timeline. So perhaps he decides that Journey's End will be his last episode as showrunner. He and Tennant would agree to kind of leave together in the Series 4 finale. Tennant would basically leave at the end of the first half, whilst Russell would leave at the end of the second half. This would then mean that Stephen Moffat's era would start with the 2008 Christmas special, which probably wouldn't be the exact same as the next Doctor, as that was very much written as a slightly gimmicky story by Russell, to tease the audience due to Tennant's departure having already been announced by that point. Perhaps to make the transition from one showrunner to another easier, the special could be written by both Russell and Moffat. But getting back to Journey's End itself, how would a newly regenerated 11th Doctor being in it change things? Well, I could imagine that 11 would be mostly out of the picture for the majority of the episodes. He'd still be recovering from his surprise regeneration, and the whole thing would perhaps be a little similar to how 10 was for much of the Christmas invasion. It would therefore be up to the Doctor's companions to confront Davros and the Daleks. Martha would still threaten them with the Osterhagen key, and Jack and Sarah Jane would still do the same with the Warp Star, but both schemes would obviously still fail, and Davros would put them all in some holding cells. Donna and Rose would stay in the TARDIS to help 11 recover from his regeneration, but they would all be put at risk when the Supreme Dalek orders that the TARDIS be sent in to the centre core of the Crucible, which is full of Z neutrino energy, which is harmful to the TARDIS's systems. The TARDIS is left without any defences and begins to rip apart. The Doctor manages to come to his senses long enough to quickly dematerialise the TARDIS, just like the newly born Metacrisis Doctor did in our timeline. Speaking of the Metacrisis Doctor, he wouldn't exist in this timeline yet, as there would obviously be no spare regenerative energy for the Doctor to siphon off into his spare hand. This would mean that we would have to replace the whole Dr. Donna arc present in some previous Series 4 episodes, namely Planet of the Ood. Perhaps the Ood just say the Doctor and Donna instead. The TARDIS would then make a dramatic entrance back on the Crucible. Davros and a majority of the Doctor's friends and companions would be shocked to see that it had actually survived, as they had thought that it had been destroyed. The 11th Doctor steps out in the same dramatic fashion that the Metacrisis Doctor did, with him having changed his clothes to his famous tweed jacket look. He rushes at Davros with the same Z neutrino biological inversion catalyzer homemade gadget. Try saying that when you're drunk. That's the Metacrisis Doctor also made in our timeline. But Davros zaps him with an energy bolt from his cybernetic hand, disabling him and causing 11 to fall to the floor, with a containment cell being activated around him shortly after. Rose and Donna rush out to try and help him, but Davros does the same thing to them, and they are also trapped in some containment cells. So yeah, 11 has literally just taken the Meta-Crisis Doctor's place so far. It looks like all hope is lost for the Doctor and co. The countdown for the reality bomb begins to count down to 1. Davros gloats about how all of their plans have failed, and how it is almost time for the end of the universe. But an alarm begins to sound, with a Dalek saying,
"Alert! Alert! Incoming spaceships detected!"
Davros flicks the monitor from the reality bomb heating up to a view outside in the Medusa Cascade. A fleet of Judoon ships suddenly appear out of nowhere. An incoming transmission from the lead ship shows the Shadow Architects address Davros on the monitor screen. Davros, by the power invested in me as Architect of the Shadow Proclamation, I order you to shut the reality bomb down and surrender yourself to us. But Davros just laughs and refuses to hand himself over. The Architect then responds by declaring war on the entire Dalek fleet. There is then an almighty battle between the Dalek and Judoon ships. The Architect beams on board the Crucible with a squad of Judoon troopers. They destroy the Daleks dotted around Davros's vault and then free the Doctor and his companions from their holding cells. The Architect then aims a Judoon blaster at Davros's head. The Doctor rushes over and tries to convince her to put the blaster down, but the Architect says that Davros needs to pay for his crimes. The Doctor agrees but says that this isn't the way. The Architect reluctantly puts the blaster down, but says that Davros will still face justice for his crimes. The Doctor nods and then moves over to the Magnetron control panel and starts flicking some switches like the Dr. Donna did in our timeline. He manages to disable all of the remaining Daleks in the fleet, quipping that it wouldn't have been possible without Davros's paranoid contingency planning in case the Daleks turned on him. The Doctor also flicks a switch to deactivate the reality bomb. The Shadow Proclamation then help return the 27 planets to their proper places in time and space, but the Supreme Dalek comes down to the vault and accuses Davros of betraying the Dalek race. Davros protests, saying that it was Dalek Khan's fault. Dalek Khan then still admits that he did indeed betray the Daleks. The Supreme Dalek shoots at Dalek Khan, revealing that his gun was on a different system to the rest of the Daleks. Khan dies, but not without prophesying that one of the Doctor's friends will die. The Supreme then fires at the Magnetron control panel, with the Doctor managing to duck out of the way just in time. The Doctor realises that there's only one planet left to be returned: Earth. Jack destroys the Supreme with his gun, and then the Doctor and companions all hurry into the TARDIS as everything is set on fire by the Magnetron's destruction. The Architects and her Judoon troopers beam back to the lead Judoon ship, but not before the Architect warns the Doctor that he must face justice himself. They take Davros with them. The Doctor and companions then still tow the Earth back to its rightful place in the TARDIS, after the Shadow Proclamation's fleet fly off before they can help. The Doctor then drops his friends off, making his farewells to Martha, Jack, Mickey and Sarah Jane. He then takes Rose and Jackie back to Pete's World. Using some remaining regenerative energy, he's still within the first 12 hours of regenerating after all, on his spare hand, to create a doppelganger of his previous self, which can live with Rose. This is indeed the Meta-Crisis Doctor, but now created in very different circumstances, and without receiving some of Donna's characteristics. David Tennant would return to play him, which would come as a surprise for viewers. The Meta-Crisis Doctor would reveal that he only had one life, and wanted to spend it with Rose. The Doctor explains that he deliberately programs the Meta-Crisis DNA to never regenerate, so that he could grow old with Rose. He tells Rose that this is his gift to her, a way of saying thank you for helping him to heal all those years ago. The Meta-Crisis Doctor then kisses Rose, with the Doctor rushing off, not wanting to look at the life that he knows he could never have himself. Eleven and Donna are then travelling in the TARDIS, off to more adventures. Donna is still recovering from seeing the Doctor change his face. She tells him about it and they hug, with the Doctor reassuring her that he's still the same man deep down, and that nothing will ever get in the way of their friendship. Then, right on cue, the TARDIS jolts violently, nearly sending the two of them spinning. The Doctor checks the monitor and realises that they're under attack by a Jadoon ship. The Architect appears on the screen and orders the Doctor to surrender himself to her immediately. The Doctor refuses and manages to outrun them in the time vortex, but he knows that they won't stop coming after him. Donna asks him what they're going to do, and the Doctor scratches his head, thinking. He then stares at Donna for a second, before lowering his head in sadness. Donna asks him what's wrong, and the Doctor wanders over to her. He tells her how sorry he is, but he can't put her in danger anymore. But Donna protests, saying that they fought worse than Shadow Proclamation before and still won. But the Doctor shakes his head and continues to tell her how sorry he is. He then wipes her memory so as to protect her from the Shadow Proclamation. He knows that if Donna's memory is wiped, then they won't come after her. He then lands the TARDIS outside her family house. Wilf hears the sounds of the TARDIS's engines and runs out to see what to him is a total stranger, holding Donna's unconscious body in his arms. The Doctor explains who he is and asks Wilf to help him get Donna inside. Wilf decides to trust him and does indeed help him get her inside the house. Later on, Eleven tells Wilf and Sylvia everything. They eventually accept that he's still the Doctor, and Wilf thanks him for bringing Donna back home. Donna walks in, now having no idea who the Doctor is, and almost completely ignoring him. This further upsets the Doctor, and he says goodbye to all three of them. We would still get that lovely moment between the Doctor and Wilf, where Wilf promises that he'll look up at the sky every night and think of the Doctor. Once back inside the TARDIS, the Doctor takes off his tweed jacket, which got wet in the rain, and gazes beyond the camera, looking heartbroken. I should say that the idea that the Shadow Proclamation would come and help save the day is what Russell had originally planned for Journey's End's conclusion. You can even find a slight tease for it in the previous episode, when the Architect says that they intend to wage war against the Daleks for stealing the 27 missing planets. So it's not implausible to imagine Russell using it for this timeline. Anyway, we then come to 2008 Christmas special. As I said earlier, this would have to be pretty different to the next Doctor, and it would be co-written by Russell and Moffat. We could still have it set in the same setting as the next Doctor though, and it could still feature the Cybermen, but Jackson Lake wouldn't pretend to be the Doctor due to what I said about Russell using his whole "is David Morrissey the next Doctor" thing as a gimmick, to tease the audience once David Tennant's departure was announced in our timeline. I'll call this alternate special Snow and Steel. Eleven and Jackson would still bond over them both losing people that they cared about. The Shadow Proclamation would appear when they follow the Doctor to Victorian London. The Doctor and Jackson would then have to fight against them, as well as Miss Hartigan and the Cybermen. The Doctor is able to defeat the Cyber King and the Shadow Architect, for now. But in the process of all of this, the TARDIS is damaged. He manages to get it in flight once he's finished having Christmas dinner with Jackson, Rosita and Frederick. But the TARDIS spirals out of control once in space, and crashes back to Earth, now in 1996. And that is where we pick things up with the alternate 11th hour, which could still be called that, or something else like Attack of the Atraxi or The Search for Prisoner Zero. Young Amelia would still call 11 the Raggedy Doctor, as his clothes would still be damaged whilst inside the crashing TARDIS, and I would still have the TARDIS change its interior and police box exterior to the versions we got for our Timelines Series 5, as I'm sure Stephen Moffat would still want to change them to further make his mark on the show, and help illustrate how we're in a brand new era for the show. We would then come to Series 5, which would obviously now air a year earlier in 2009. This would probably mean that Russell would have to tell Moffat that he was leaving sooner, thus allowing Smith to be cast sooner and for filming to take place a lot sooner than in our timeline as well. We could maybe have the Shadow Proclamation be the ones that help bring the rest of the Doctor's enemies together for the Pandorica Alliance, even though it would mean that Series 5 wouldn't be the fresh start for the show that it was in our timeline, with this alternate version tying more into the previous era, and 11 would still be imprisoned in the Pandorica by the Alliance, as they would still think that the Doctor and the TARDIS would supposedly bring about the end of the universe, although obviously it would turn out that it was River's song being trapped in the TARDIS that would do it. A Christmas Carol would then be the 2009 Christmas special, and Series 6 would follow in 2010. Perhaps Madame Kavarian and the Silence could be revealed to be working for the Shadow Proclamation, with them being the big bads for Smith's whole era, or the Architects and the Jadoon could even take their place completely. The Doctor, the Widow and the Wardrobe would air on Christmas Day 2010, but we would then come to something rather interesting. Now, I could just have Series 7 play out the same as in our timeline, with the first half airing 1 year and the second half airing the next year, and indeed that would probably be the most likely. But just to be a bit different, how about we further split them up into the alternates Series 7 and 8 respectively. So our timeline Series 7A would be the alternate Series 7, and our Series 7B would be the alternate Series 8. This would mean that we would have to turn to the expanded universe side of things to help fill the empty slots these alternate series would have. So here's how I would do it. Series 7, 2011. Asylum of the Daleks, dinosaurs on a spaceship, a town called Mercy, the silent stars go by, Hunter's Moon, Paradox Lost, Borrowed Time, The Way Through the Woods, The Power of Three, Dead of Winter, Dark Horizons, The Art of Death, and The Angels Take Manhattan. And then the Snowmen would be the 2011 Christmas special. And then I would do this for the alternate Series 8. Series 8, 2012. The Bells of St. John, The Rings of Akaten, Cold War, Hyde, Dark Star Academy, Touched by an Angel, Journey to the Centre of the TARDIS, Sleepers in the Dust, The Crimson Horror, Nightmare in Silver, The New Humans, Snakebite, and The Name of the Doctor. And then the 2012 Christmas special would be The Time of the Doctor, or if you want to go with an alternate title, how about The Siege of Trenzalore? This would still be Matt Smith's final story, with Peter Capaldi still taking over as 12 for the alternate Series 9, which would be the same as our timeline's Series 8. This timeline's 50th anniversary special would still be The Day of the Doctor, which would now see Tennant, Smith and Capaldi alongside John Hurt's War Doctor, and Matt Smith would be returning to the show only about a year after he'd left. This might mean that he might initially be a bit more reluctant to come back, although knowing how much he loved playing the Doctor and Stephen Moffat's telling him what he had planned for the special might help to persuade him to return anyway. When it came time for the 60th anniversary specials in this timeline, David Tennant and Catherine Tate would still return as the 14th Doctor and Donna respectively, but things would be slightly more emotional for 14 as he wouldn't have even seen Donna since Journey's End. By the way, Dreamland wouldn't exist in this timeline, as there would obviously be no point in the Doctor's personal timeline where it could fit into. An interesting thing to note, which I forgot to mention earlier, is that the alternate 11th hour, or whatever you want to call it, would now be the show's 200th story in this timeline. And I should also say that Matt Smith would appear in this timeline's version of the Sarah Jane Adventures story, The Wedding of Sarah Jane Smith, and then he'd still appear in Death of the Doctor 2. But that's more than enough for timeline 1 now, I think. So let's now move on to timeline 2. Timeline number 2, Ian McKellen is the Doctor. Now let me explain why I've gone with McKellen for this timeline. You see, Russell once joked in the lockdown tweet-along for the Stolen Earth / Journey's End that they should have gotten an A-list actor to briefly play the Doctor when Tennant regenerates, just to basically milk the whole thing for even longer to the audience. He suggested either Ian McKellen or Judi Dench for this. Now, as I say, he was mainly just joking when he said this, but it got me thinking, what if he had this idea back in 2008 and they decided to go with it? I've chosen Ian McKellen as I don't think it would be fair to have Dench be the first female Doctor for such a short amount of time, and I've decided that rather than just appearing for one scene, how about McKellen is then the Doctor for the Series 4 specials. I know some of you will think that it's very unlikely they would have been able to afford such a big name as Ian McKellen for Doctor Who back then, but hey, let's have some fun and say that it happens anyway. So the regeneration stops and Ian McKellen's alternate 11th Doctor jolts backwards. He would look around and spot Donna, Jack and Rose. He would greet them calmly and kindly. Donna would be freaked out whilst Jack would find this new Doctor attractive, a reference to his flirting with Graham, and Rose would begin to tear up seeing her Doctor change in front of her again. McKellen's 11 would ask for a small mirror to see his new appearance. Jack gives him one, and 11 would remark that his new face was a significant improvement, similar to how 6 was when he'd just regenerated from 5. Rose and Jack would explain to Donna about regeneration, and how Rose had seen the Doctor regenerate before, into the man that she and Donna once knew. Rose admitted that it had broken her heart at the time, and seeing it happen a second time would be just as traumatic for her. Yes, she'd been through it before, but she had a real connection with 10, just like she had with 9, but arguably even more so. Suddenly the TARDIS would jolt violently and be transported to the Crucible. McKellen's 11 would knock his head on the console, rendering him unconscious. Rose and Jack would then go out to confront Stavros, instructing Donna to look after the Doctor. Davros and the Daleks would confront Rose and Jack and demand to know where the Doctor was. Rose and Jack would try and impersonate the Doctor, but Davros and the Daleks are not fooled, and already know who they are, from a mixture of knowing about them from their previous battles with the Daleks and from Dalek Khan's predictions. So Rose and Jack give up the charade of pretending to be the Doctor, and tell the Daleks that the Doctor had just regenerated, and is recovering in the TARDIS with Donna looking after him. Hearing this, Davros smirks sinisterly, and sends the TARDIS down to the core. Rose and Jack protest and try to attack Davros, but he places them both in holding cells. He then explains that this was his perfect opportunity to be rid of the Doctor once and for all, now that he is vulnerable in a state of regenerative sickness and trauma. Donna begins to panic inside the exploding TARDIS console room, until the heat of the control room burning up jolts 11 awake. He quickly dematerializes the TARDIS just in time and makes it rematerialize in space away from the Crucible to safety. Jack and Rose would watch on the Crucible's viewer screen of the TARDIS apparently being destroyed. Davros would then laugh and gloat in glee, but Rose would wait until he wasn't looking and activate a distress beacon in her pocket. She'd nod to Jack, who would nod back and then do a similar thing on his vortex manipulator. Rose's beacon would send signals to Mickey, Jackie and the rest of the Torchwood team on Pete's world, and Jax would send one to Gwen, Yanto and Captain John Hart, who would then teleport into the Torchwood hub and help Gwen and Yanto escape the time lock and the Dalek that's trapped in it. Meanwhile, Eleven and Donna would have a heart-to-heart talk in the TARDIS. Donna would be heartbroken that the 10th Doctor changed, and it feels like he's died and been replaced by a total stranger in her eyes. Eleven would sadly nod in understanding Donna's perspective of things, knowing that humans have only one life and it's fine for her to react this way, knowing how Rose felt when he regenerated the last time from his 9th to his now previous self, his 10th incarnation. Back on the Crucible, a Dalek reports incoming teleport signatures. Davros is confused and then finds himself surrounded by a combination of Torchwood teams from both the main universe and Pete's world. Martha, Sarah Jane, Mickey and Jackie also teleport in and manage to release Rose and Jack. In desperation, Jack, Mickey and Rose all aim guns at Davros, telling him that he's going to pay for supposedly killing the Doctor and Donna. Remember, as far as they know, the TARDIS was destroyed with Eleven and Donna still inside. Davros would verbally lash out at them, saying that such insignificant insects like yourselves could never kill the lords of the Dalek race. But Jack aims his gun even closer to Davros, saying, "You wanna bet?" Back on the TARDIS, Eleven has finished repairing the console room by replacing the glass roundels on the coral walls, after the TARDIS had nearly been destroyed in the core of the Crucible. He's also changed the colour of the interior to a slightly gloomier green, to better reflect his new self. He notices Donna now looking at the console scanner with a mix of shock and disbelief. He would ask her what was wrong, and she would point at the scanner, and Eleven's eyes widen in a mix of horror and disgust. He sees Rose, Jack, Mickey, Jackie, Sarah Jane and Martha holding Davros at gunpoint and demanding that he bring the Doctor and Donna back. Mickey would have Davros at gunpoint with his energy blaster, along with Jack pointing his defabricator gun at Davros. Martha would be threatening to blow up the entire Earth to stop the Daleks' plans for it with the creation of the reality bomb, with her showing Davros the Osterhagen key. Sarah Jane would do a similar thing with her warp star. This further enrages Davros, with him making them a promise that even if he couldn't make all of them suffer for their actions, he'd make sure that at least one of them would. Donna pleads with McKellen's 11 inside the TARDIS to hopefully find a solution without any more violence. 11 agrees after seeing the repulsive actions of his friends on the scanner, so he would materialise the TARDIS on the Crucible, which would come as quite a surprise to everyone on board. Once the Doctor steps out, he tells his friends to stand down, saying that there is no need for such senseless violence. Jack, Rose and Mickey would protest, but would eventually comply and tell everyone else to stand down. Davros would compare the Doctor to an old, distinguished general, barking out orders for his lackeys to follow, but who would compliment the Doctor on his new face, as it better reflected all the many years of conflict he had seen, and that Tennant seemed to be too arrogant and egotistical, which had been his undoing. Much to everyone else's surprise, 11 would agree with this assessment, saying that his previous self had indeed had too much of an ego at times. McKellen's 11 would then ask Davros what he was up to this time, and Davros would tell him all about the reality bomb. The Doctor would try to reason and plead with Davros to stop this, because a reality with nothing but Daleks would be pointless, as there would be nothing to conquer or rule over, and they would eventually turn on each other. He gives Davros and his Dalek fleet an offer. They can return the planets and dispose of the Crucible, and in return the Doctor would help them rebuild Skaro and create a better and more peaceful life for themselves. Davros would pause to contemplate for a moment, leaving everyone on edge, before he accepts. 11 would then hurry to the console and work at the controls to send the planets back with the magnetron. As 11 does this with Donna's help, Davros smiles cunningly at Rose and the others, quietly reminding them of his promise. He points his mechanical hand at the Doctor at first. He turns to the companions, who begin to panic, and Davros's smirk widens and transforms into a wicked grin as he turns his hand to Donna instead and fires a high voltage of electricity at Donna, hitting her in the chest. Donna would be sent flying backwards, and her injured body would hit the TARDIS and crash to the floor, unconscious and badly hurt. 11 would be horrified and enraged and decided that enough was enough. Dalek Khan would edge him on even further by saying he must do what he must do. 11 would then grab a gun from one of the Parallel Universe's Torchwood members and aim it at Davros, much to the shock of all his friends. Rose would try to talk 11 out of it, saying that this wasn't the answer and wouldn't help make Donna better, but 11 would call out her hypocrisy, as she and the others had all been prepared to kill Davros before he stopped them. Rose would admit this, but would remind 11 that he had stopped them by reminding them that it wasn't the way, and that he should take his own advice now. 11 would reluctantly sigh and pass the gun back to the Parallel Universe Torchwood operative. He would tell his friends to keep an eye on Davros, whilst he continued to try and get the planets back to the correct places. 11 would manage to get many of the 27 planets back, but he would work too fast and cause the magnetron to overload and explode. Some of the planets would then be lost, much to the horror of 11 and his allies. The Doctor barks at his friends to get inside the TARDIS, but he knows that he still needs to do something to stop the massive Dalek fleet. He strolls over to Davros and quietly says to him, "You made me do this. Don't you ever forget that." He then manages to fix a part of the magnetron console and uses it to wipe out the entire fleet, committing genocide and ensuring Dalek Khan's prophecy. Rose, Martha, Sarah Jane and Jack come running out of the TARDIS, with Jack asking what the hell has the Doctor done. He replies with, fulfilling the prophecy. Davros watches as his Dalek children die, screaming in agony. He turns to the Doctor with an intense anger that even he has never experienced before. You killed them all, you senseless butcher! Hail the Doctor, the exterminator of millions! The Doctor reminds Davros that he can hardly take the moral high ground. He says that the Daleks have wiped out billions. Jack angrily tells him it isn't a numbers game, but the Doctor snaps and reminds Jack of how many lives he and his tortured team have taken. He then snaps further at Rose, Martha and Sarah Jane. He says that they all either have blood on their hands or were going to. Rose for when she destroyed the Dalek Emperor and his own Dalek fleet with the power of the time vortex in the parting of the ways, even though Rose doesn't remember this, so it come as quite a shock to her. Martha for attempting to use the Osterhagen key to destroy the entire Earth and everyone on it, just to prevent the reality bomb from being used, and Sarah Jane for trying to convince the Doctor to destroy the Daleks at their very beginning in Genesis of the Daleks, and he also says that all of them seemed fine with trying to kill Davros earlier. He then orders Jack to give him his gun, but Jack refuses. He says that he won't let the Doctor have Davros's blood on his hands as well. Jack then says that the Doctor and Rose should take Donna's dying body into the TARDIS. The Doctor reluctantly agrees, but carries Donna by himself, saying that he wants to do it by himself. Davros tries to taunt the Doctor by calling him the Destroyer of Worlds, but the Doctor is too grief-stricken over Donna to bother listening to him. Jack destroys the Supreme Dalek after it comes down to try and kill Davros, believing that he had betrayed the Daleks by allowing the Doctor to destroy their fleet. Jack and Rose then leave Davros and Khan to seemingly die in a gigantic inferno, after Jack blasts his gun at the Magnetron console, setting the entire vault on fire. The TARDIS dematerializes with the Doctor and all of his Children of Time on board. They manage to tow Earth back home, with it still being the only world left to return. But once that's done with, there's no time for celebration. Donna weakly calls out to the Doctor and tells him not to blame himself for her death. She does this in her last dying breath, with a comforting smile before she dies in the Doctor's arms. The Doctor's eyes run with tears, but he manages to compose himself after a minute or so, and solemnly takes everyone back home. They all try to comfort him, but he just stays silent. He drops them off home, but doesn't bother to say any goodbyes. He just tells them when they've landed and then waits for them to go outside, before getting the TARDIS ready to depart again. He does this a few times as he drops off Sarah Jane, Mickey, Martha, Jack, Gwen, Yanto and John. Then Rose, Jackie and the rest of the parallel universe Torchwood operatives. Before leaving the TARDIS, Jack apologises for snapping at the Doctor earlier, but the Doctor just tells him to get out of his sight, not even bothering to look up and make eye contact with Jack. He just continues looking down at the TARDIS controls instead. Rose cries as she and Jackie depart, as she can tell that the Doctor is truly broken now. Once he is alone in the TARDIS console room, the Doctor cradles Donna's dead body in his arms and begins to cry again. So it will be something similar to when the Master died in Ten's arms at the end of Series 3. The TARDIS then materialises outside Donna's family home. The Doctor carries her body to the front door, presses the doorbell, and then runs off, feeling too ashamed to even face Wilfred and Sylvia and explain what happened to Donna. Wilfred would answer the door and would see Donna's body and weep. Sylvia comes to see what her father is crying about and sees Donna just lying there. She also breaks down in tears, with Wilf giving her a loving hug as they both continue crying. Sylvia would say that it was all the doctor's fault, but Wilf would be more sympathetic to the doctor. He would later look up at the night sky, hoping that the doctor was alright. But obviously, the doctor isn't alright. He sits on his chair in a TARDIS console room and just stares off camera, tears once again rolling down his face, which is where the episode would then end. So yeah, a pretty depressing and awful time for McKellen's 11th Doctor, and he would continue to be in a state of mourning in the following Christmas special, still called The Next Doctor. This would be so that Russell can still tease the audience about the speculation for who would play the Doctor next, after McKellen explains that he'll only be playing the part for a few specials in a Radio Times interview. In this alternate version of The Next Doctor, we find the Doctor having retired to Victorian London, in a very similar situation to when our timeline's 11th Doctor retires to there after losing the ponds in the Snowmen. McKellen's 11 has become a bit of an Ebenezer Scrooge type of character, although he still has the occasional moment of kindness and twinkle in his eye. He heads out to the nearby market square and asks a young boy attending one of the market stands what day it is. The boy asks him if he's had too much to drink, much to the Doctor's amusement. The Doctor explains that he's merely overslept and then asks the boy again. The boy tells him that it is Christmas Eve. The Doctor then gives him a thin smile and thanks the boy for telling him. He then hears someone, i.e. Rosita, call out his name and rushes his way to her, utterly confused. This is obviously where he meets Jackson Lake, who is still pretending to be the Doctor. Over the course of the story, the Doctor and Jackson would slowly bond. The Doctor is initially angry with his supposed future self's much jollier persona, although he warms to Jackson after realising how much of a broken man he is, something which they would have in common. The Doctor would eventually reveal to Jackson and Rosita who Jackson really was, after he manages to piece it all together in the same way that Ten did in our timeline. After being shocked and melancholic at this revelation for a while, and remembering how he'd lost his wife and had his son abducted by the Cybermen, Jackson still manages to come to his senses, and he and Rosita help the Doctor defeat Miss Hartigan and the Cybermen. Jackson then offers the Doctor to come join him, Rosita and Frederick for Christmas dinner. The Doctor initially declines, saying that he prefers to keep himself to himself these days, but Jackson insists after he and the Doctor have a chat about how much the two of them have lost, and how Jackson understands what the Doctor's going through. The Doctor eventually accepts the offer, and the two of them wish each other a Merry Christmas, with Jackson having helped the Doctor to heal and recover a bit from Donna's death, and all the events that transpired. I should say that McKellen's 11th Doctor would be included among the Doctor's faces that won the Cybermen's info stamps, as it was technology that they had actually stolen from the Daleks, who had, unlike the Cybermen, already encountered this still relatively new incarnation of the Doctors. The Doctor would pause for a brief moment whilst revealing the truth about Jackson's identity to realise that this meant that at least a few Daleks had somehow survived the events of the previous episode, much to the Doctor's disappointment. Anyway, the next episode would then still be Planet of the Dead. This would basically play out more or less the same as it did in our timeline, but McKellen's 11 would obviously be a much more depressed and weary character to how Tennant's 10 was in our timeline's version of the special. There would also be no romantic tension between the Doctor and Lady Christina, although she would still ask the Doctor if she could come with him, after experiencing absolute awe and wonderlust from what they had been through. The Doctor would still turn her down, saying that he no longer trusts himself to be responsible for someone else's life, and that he couldn't go through losing someone all over again. Then would come the waters of Mars. The Doctor still has his Time Lord victorious moments, with Ian McKellen no doubt acting his socks off just as much as David Tennant did with that, and the Doctor would still only realise that he'd gone too far after Adelaide kills herself to keep the web of time intact, and ensure that her granddaughter still goes on to be an important part of Earth's space travel. Then we come to the end of time, and oh blimey, would there be a lot of emotional drama to deal with here. Obviously this would be the first that Wilf and Sylvia see of the Doctor since they'd buried Donna after the end of Journey's End. Sylvia would lash out at the Doctor when she realises who he is, and even slap him in the face and tell him to leave her and Wilf alone. But Wilf would still be a little more understanding, especially after he and the Doctor have a heart-to-heart moment in a local cafe, which would be the same cafe that Wilf took Ten to in our timeline, although Wilf obviously wouldn't have chosen that cafe due to it being close to where Donna would be shopping. It would instead be the closest one to the cemetery where Donna is buried, with Wilf bumping into the Doctor for the first time when they accidentally choose to pay a visit to her grave at the same time as each other. The Doctor would obviously need to explain regeneration to Wilf and Sylvia, so that they know that he's still the same man that they previously met, and I'm sure that there would be a moment towards the end of the story where Sylvia would forgive the Doctor for what happened to Donna, and admit that it wasn't actually his fault. This might have been helped by the Doctor giving her and Wilf a lottery ticket, and Wilf telling Sylvia the full context as to what happened to Donna, and why the Doctor just left her on their doorstep, rather than face them both, after the Doctor has explained all of that to Wilf, of course. John Sims Master would still be the main adversary for the end of time, and Rassilon and the Time Lords would still try to return to the universe via the White Point Star and the Master's psychological 4-Nox signal. The Doctor would still need to regenerate after saving Wilf from a lethal dose of radiation in one of those Vinvoce glass booths. He would start off being angry and upset about this, as it would mean that he would have to regenerate yet again, with his current incarnation having barely lived at all. But he would still ultimately do the heroic thing and sacrifice himself to save Wilf, after making a farewell tour to all of his companions and friends, where he makes up with and forgives Jack, Martha and all the others for what they did in this timeline's version of Journey's End. He manages to send a letter to Rose, who is back in Pete's world, and tells her that he'll be okay, and that she shouldn't worry about him. He does this through burning up another sun in the main universe, although a written message is as much as he can send, due to how closed off the walls between realities are starting to get. He explains this to Rose in the letter. For his final trip, he then travels back in time to the 1st of December 2007 to see Donna for one last time. This is just a few weeks before her wedding to Lance on Christmas Day, and when the Doctor and Donna met for the first time. He sees her celebrating her hen party with her mates, and is glad to see her having such a good time. He smiles and chuckles to himself as he sees her laughing and gossiping away in the snow. He then staggers back to the TARDIS, the regeneration energy starting to kick in. Ood Sigma still appears and tells the Doctor that he and the rest of the Ood will sing him to his sleep. Once back inside the TARDIS, Ian McKellen's 11th Doctor says his final words, addressing the TARDIS. "Take care of the next me, won't you, old girl?" And then he turns to face just off camera and says, "I don't want to go." This will hit differently from how it did when Tennant said it in our timeline, as McKellen's 11 had barely even lasted that long, so him being reluctant to change would arguably make more sense. He then regenerates into Matt Smith, who is now the 12th Doctor, with the regeneration still blowing the TARDIS console room up. The music playing during the regeneration would still be Veil Disarm, although it would now be called Veil Undisarm, meaning Goodbye 11. And from there, things would play out pretty similarly to how they did in our timeline. Smith would still have the same kind of tenure and would be succeeded by Capaldi's 13th Doctor, who would then be succeeded by Whittaker's 14th Doctor in turn, and then Tennant would come back as 15 for the 60th anniversary specials, although it might be better if Billie Piper returns as Rose for the 60th, as obviously Donna wouldn't be able to return. This would mean that the toy maker would have to be the one to cause Rose to turn up again in the main universe. Perhaps he does this so as to confuse the Doctor into wondering who could have such power and be responsible, and to tease him about his still kind of unresolved romance with Rose, and to try and let it distract him through the course of the 60th specials. The Star Beast would have to be somewhat different, as it would literally just be Tennant's 15 and Rose for that episode. There would be no family involved, as Jackie, Pete and Tony would still be stuck in the alternate universe, Pete's world, and there would obviously be no Metacrisis Dr. Donut resolution to the episode, so the Doctor and Rose would defeat the Meep in a more bog-standard ending, with them managing to deactivate the Meep spaceship together, while Blue Yonder would still be the same, just with a different Doctor and companion pairing, of course, which would lead to some awful emotional manipulation by the Not Finns to the Doctor and Rose, about such things as when Rose was trapped in Pete's world, when McCullen's 11th snapped at her and others after Donna's death, and about how Rose never really resolved her romance with the Doctor. At the end of this timeline's version of the giggle is when Tennant's 15 would settle down with Rose and her family in Pete's world, effectively taking the Metacrisis Doctor's place, as he wouldn't exist in this timeline. He would be able to do this after his one final wish is granted by the Toymaker's domain, similar to how that Mallet was able to give our timelines 14 and 15 their own TARDIS each, technically speaking. And then the 16th Doctor would be played by Ncuti Gatwa, with his 16 returning to the main universe, aka N-Space, to continue on his adventures in the TARDIS. But there are still a few things I should address about this second timeline. First up is the matter of Ian McKellen's costume as the alternate 11th Doctor. I think something similar to his top hat look from the Mr. Holmes film would work best. So he'd wear a black Victorian frock coat with a plain black tie, white shirt and black waistcoat underneath. He'd also wear matching black trousers, polished black shoes and an aforementioned black top hat, complete with black leather gloves. He would continue to wear black for much of his short tenure, so as to portray him still being in a state of mourning after Donna's death. His sonic screwdriver would be a black version of 9s and 10s Sonic, with added red and green settings, and a nice little callback to River Song's Sonic from Silence in a Library / Forest of the Dead, and the version of the theme tune that would be used during McKellen's short tenure would be a darker version of the 2008 theme, as Murray Gold wouldn't see much point in composing a new theme for a Doctor that wouldn't last that long. Although if you don't like that idea, then maybe a prototype version of the 2010 theme could be used instead, but with the RTD1 era title sequence still being used alongside it. I should also say that Ian McKellen would actually be the oldest actor to play the Doctor at the time of his casting. He was 69 in 2008. He would only be beaten by John Hurt, who would be 73 when he'd be cast as the War Doctor in 2013. So I could imagine Russell wanting to be a bit more considerate about McKellen's age, by not having his Doctor run about too much and not have as many action scenes as David Tennant arguably did. Ian McKellen would also have been the first gay person to ever play the part. This timeline's version of Dreamland would feature Ian McKellen's 11 instead of David Tennant's 10, obviously. Ian McKellen would appear as the Doctor in the Sarah Jane Adventures in this timeline's version of The Wedding of Sarah Jane Smith. This would be where his 11 makes up to Sarah Jane, as during the events of the story he would think that he'd lost her at one point, and realise how much she still meant to him. He would tell Clyde, Rani and Luke all about Donna's death, which would lead to them telling him that he's not on his own, and giving him a group hug, which would help him feel a little bit better. McKellen's 11 would then still save Luke from getting run over in the end of time, and say goodbye to Sarah Jane then as well. Ian McKellen might also be able to return as 11 for the 50th anniversary special, The Day of the Doctor. However, an agreement might have to be reached between the BBC and Peter Jackson to allow him to return to Doctor Who whilst he would still potentially be reprising his role as Gandalf for the Hobbit films. If McKellen was in a 50th, then I think it would make sense to have Tennant travelling with Donna during the course of the special, because obviously there wouldn't be any Series 4 Specials era slots that you could fit the special in from Tennant's perspective, and for McKellen's 11 to see Donna and to smile sadly at her. It would be McKellen's 11 who would convince Tennant and Smith's 12 to help the War Doctor out, since he would kind of sympathise with War due to both of them going through a lot of awful stuff, with the Time War for the War Doctor and Donna's death and committing genocide in Journey's End for McKellen's 11. Obviously, Matt Smith would still be the Doctor's last incarnation in their original regeneration cycle, with John Hurt still being introduced as the War Doctor for the 50th anniversary. But now, instead of him being the last because of a combination of War's existence and Tennant regenerating twice, it would be because of the existence of both the War Doctor and McKellen's 11th Doctor. McKellen might be able to eventually do some Big Finish audios, although it would be very much dependent on his schedule, as he is quite a big and well-known actor. Matt Smith's first episode would have to be called something like the 12th hour in this timeline, as obviously he will be playing the 12th Doctor now, not the 11th. Although you could always call it something else if you prefer, as obviously the 11th hour was probably called that in reference to the common saying, but that would no longer make sense with the 12th hour instead. I think that's pretty much everything major covered for this second timeline, although if you think I missed anything out or should have expanded further on anything, then please let me know below. So yeah, two very fascinating timelines, and I'm sure that this video will probably be another that beats the records for the longest what if video I've done yet, which is kind of why it took me so long to get this one out really, but I hope it was worth the wait for you all. But anyway, so there's my take on what if David Tennant had left after the Stolen Earth / Journey's End. But what do you think? Do you agree with my take on it or not? Would you have done anything differently, and which of the two timelines I came up with did you prefer? Please let me know in the comments section below, and thank you to Nanny Nom Noms for his help with this video, and to Billy Bob for the awesome cover art. Anyway, so thanks for watching, I hope you liked it. Please don't forget to press that subscribe button below, as well as press the bell icon at the side of it, so that you'll stay notified of when all my new videos come out. This channel currently has 2,404 subscribers as of time of writing and recording this video, but if we can get to 2,500 by the end of this year, then I will do a Q&A, where you can ask me whatever questions you want. Just keep them polite, please. Also, please rate and comment below your thoughts on all of this, and please feel free to donate to my Ko-fi page, link in the description, or send me a YouTube super thanks below, if you want to, of course. And I now also have a Discord server we can chat about anything from Doctor Who to what if scenarios and just whatever you want, really. You can find a link to it via a pinned comment below, and I shall see you all in another video. So until next time, bye bye.